Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about really what comprises a healthy diet and what we need to be focusing on. And I think some of this, the funny thing is that serious athletes are the ones who can break these rules the most, but they're also the ones who are least likely to do it. But that being said, I can always throw in some side notes as far as understanding that a lot of athletes have very, very, very high calorie needs, and which can still be filled following these rules. And I think particularly this is where the nuts and the grains come in. But as a general rule, I tell people to follow what we saw with this big meta-analysis. It was done a few years ago regarding what diets seemed to be the best for cardiovascular health, and that seemed to be diets where people ate out of all of these food groups. If the highest percentage of your diet was comprised of these groups, it had the lowest rates of cardiovascular disease overall. And that was meat, dairy, and by meat we mean leaner cuts of meat. We're not telling you to eat big old giant fatty cuts of steak, but meat, dairy, fruits, vegetables, nuts. That's what was found. Okay, that's what was found. Now, when people will say, well, my Snickers bar counts as that, well, no, it doesn't, because there's tons of stuff in the Snickers bar not on that list. You see how that works? So it's essentially whole foods geared around those things. Now, there's also been a lot of health benefits found with things like grains, even whole grains. We could argue that for people who have the calorie needs, white rice. Okay, we could make that argument. But what I want to stress here is that when I list these foods, the biggest problem you have is that people who are diet zealots, they want to jump in and say, aha, this supports my ideas, and they'll exclude entire categories. The keto people will say, aha, the meat and the dairy, and then maybe the vegetables. The carnivore people will go, oh, okay, the meat, yeah, and maybe the dairy. Yeah, that's it. And they'll ignore the rest. The vegans will ignore the meat and the dairy, and they'll pretend that these things are going to be the biggest contributors. And I think what people need to understand with this is that we're not saying the most highly refined versions either. What we find when we look closely at individual foods, things like butter, in studies tend to be horrifically bad for your lipid profile. Okay? And I've had people argue that, they're like, well, it's just heavy cream. Well, no, what we find is that heavy cream is actually worse than whole milk, considerably worse on your blood work. Butter is even worse than heavy cream. And people will say, well, I don't get it. Why would it? It's part of what's in there. Yeah, it's part of what's in there, and you're losing all the nutritional value. Okay, if you think about it, why is dairy so amazing? Really, really, really high quality protein. Well, there's no protein in heavy cream or butter. It's all been taken out. It's large amounts of calcium and magnesium, but again, potentially cardioprotective. Those are all removed. They've all been stripped out. All the B12, well, that's stripped out too. See the issue with that idea? You're taking out most of the really healthy stuff and leaving in the most questionable stuff. Meaning because most foods have, even whole foods have some stuff that's good or bad in there. It's just a lot of the whole foods, the good stuff, balances the bad stuff out so much that it's still a net positive, if that makes sense. Again, barring obesity, barring you getting really overweight from just eating too much of it. But it's harder to get fat on whole foods too. It's a lot more difficult. Now, that's where people mess up with it, and they're not understanding that fact. Well, heavy cream, you've removed all those things. Butter, you've refined the fat even further, and it's essentially just a pure saturated fat, refined saturated fat. The same people will get upset at refined vegetable oils. What's a refined oil with the nutrition stripped out and the oil's been damaged and refined? Well, what do you think butter is? You don't think that churning process causes molecular changes to the butter? You might want to look into exactly what it does. It actually does change the fat. So, that's what we mean if that's not dairy. Yogurts and things have been found to have very protective cardioprotective benefits, plus the gut health because of the probiotics. Well, that's a little bit different, isn't it? Right? It's a little bit different. Same thing, we go over to meats. Well, I mean, we mean meat. We don't mean the fattiest cuts that you can find off the animal. We're talking about a balance of meat, preferably the leaner. We're not talking about meats that you've cured in nitrates, right? Even that's been overblown a little bit, by the way. But it does increase risk. It does increase risk. But it's been a little overblown. But that's not what we're talking about. I'm not telling you to eat bacon. I'm telling you to eat some lean steak, some lean chicken breast, some lean turkey, some fish. All right, these things are great. All right, the other crowds will argue, well, the fruits and vegetables have anti-nutrients. If you believe that, I'm sorry, you're a moron. There are so many hundreds of studies debunking that nonsense that you're part of a cult. It's not a concern. All right, again, the health benefits are absolutely massive. That's my problem with the flexible dieting approach. Not once has any study ever shown that replacing the fruits and vegetables in your diet with Twinkies and Ho-Hos to ever improve health. Not once, right? The whole 80-20% thing is not an evidence-based. It's a dietary cult by extremists in the flexible dieting thing, okay? It's actually, to me, extreme, because I don't think there's anything extreme about saying, hey, I'm going to eat a bunch of whole foods. Right, I'm going to live on meat, dairy, fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains. Okay, that's not extreme. My God. I mean, the foods we had historically, right? We've had a long time. Healthy foods, like that's extreme? No, it's not. That's what we should be eating. But we do need a balance of those things, right? We do need the benefits of the animal protein. We really massively benefit from the calcium and things in the dairy. All right, the B12 in the animal sources. But the animal protein itself has enormous health benefits. Same thing with the vegetables, the fruits, everything else. It's not just the vitamin C. People say, oh, they're looking at just those micros. No, it's all the phytonutrients and polyphenols and everything else. These things have, when you start looking at them, almost an unlimited capacity towards reducing cancer and other stuff. In other words, there doesn't seem to be a measurable upper threshold that we know of to where it doesn't slightly reduce risks of cancers and other things. So we should always be trying to squeeze more of these things into our diet. Okay? The issue is, again, it's hard to overeat. Problem with athletes is, well, what if we can't eat enough? Well, white rice works. The people say, well, isn't that refined to some extent? Sure it is. But it seems to be neutral. Like something like white rice, unless it's been fortified or whatever, seems to be a neutral, meaning it's just glucose. And the human body handles glucose extremely well. It's our primary fuel source. Like it's perfectly fine to consume white rice. It's just not giving you a lot of health benefits. But if you need extra calories to fuel training, it works phenomenally well because it's neutral. It's not really a negative effect in the body. It's a good way to get tasty calories in. It has some nutrition that's not optimal, but you may need that. Your other alternative, that's where the nuts and stuff come in, because we know all the high saturated fat is harmful to you. That is, again, pretty well documented. We're not saying all saturated fat. There's a safe threshold, right? It's a safe daily threshold. But if you're going to eat a bunch of fats in your diet, the data is overwhelming that polyunsaturated fats are best. And then monounsaturated are a little more neutral, not as beneficial. But not harmful either. Polyunsaturated fats are your best bet for health. Well, where are we going to get most of this from? Nuts and things. And again, I'm not telling you, when I say that, I'm not saying go out and drink a bunch of vegetable oil. It's not what I'm telling you. I'm saying some natural peanut butter, some natural almond butter. You can eat some pecans, some walnuts. Okay? These foods have massive nutritional value. They have fats that are beneficial in terms of inflammation, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease. The data is overwhelming supporting it. Not my opinion. There's no opinion here. They've got fiber. Okay. It's beneficial stuff. So this is a good way if you really struggle with getting the calories you need as an athlete. Well, that's where things like nuts and nut butters really and truly come in handy. They're extremely helpful there, just like the white rice can be. Again, barring the fact that we can't always use them for training fuel outside of endurance. Your high intensity training is going to have to come from carbohydrate. But, a lot of times we can get that from fruit or whole grains. But if we can't, right, rice works. But if we just need extra calories and energy, you want the most heart healthy way to go beyond that, nuts. It's a simple solution. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.